Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the growing tensions in the Middle East. Iran has fired around 12 missiles in an Iraqi city where they believed that the center of the Israelis was established, through which they were carrying out their activities. It was pretty close to the new under construction US embassy also. However, hardly two people got injured. One was a taxi driver and one was a farmer there. But no major casualties have been reported. But this was done in retaliation to two of the very important individuals that were assassinated and killed by the Israeli spies in Syria. If you remember, when General Soleimani was killed, and after that we also got to know that one of the top scientists of Iran was killed, again there was retaliation from the Iranian side, and a barrage of missiles were fired upon the center where the US soldiers were stationed. Again, there was no major casualty over there except for few people who got injured. Now, what sort of an effect it is going to have on the JCPOA negotiations? As we all know, that Russia has sidelined themselves from this, and this particular negotiation has come to a halt. Whereas the Western countries, they all believed that they were very close to a final deal, a final conclusion. On the other hand, because since everything seems to be related, the fifth round of talks that was supposed to be held between the Iranians and Saudis, that has also been called off. So some tension is also brewing on that part, because the Saudis supported the Iraqis and they took a stance again against the Iranians. Now, we'll be talking about that, and we'll also be talking about that since the Americans and the US believe that this was a step taken by the Iranians against the sovereignty of the Iraqi people. So to talk about it, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. In our studio, we have Air Vice Marshal retired Ikramullah Bhatti Saab, who's a senior analyst. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. And on Skype, we have with us Ambassador Asif Durrani Saab, senior diplomat. Durrani Saab, thank you so much for your time, sir. Pleasure to have you in the show. And on the telephone line, we have with us Farukh Amil Saab. He's a former chair of OIC Geneva. Thank you so much, Farukh Amil Saab, for your time, sir. Pleasure to have you in the show. Now, starting off from you, AVM Saab, now, first of all, 12 missiles were fired, ballistic missiles, as they reported, and they fell very close to this Israeli setup. Now, this was reported by the Iranian television, Press TV, and they said that since a lot of activities were being observed and were being carried out through that particular area, so that was supposed to be targeted. And in retaliation to what was done to two of the members in Syria by the Israelis, assassination, I mean, this is their proper way of eliminating the adversaries. Now, sir, again, one of the major effects on JCPOA, the talks between the Iranians and the Saudis, the fifth round of talks, perhaps that has been stalled again. Middle East, sir, where we all thought things will settle down. Very positive statements were coming out from Saudi Arabia, from UAE, and even Iran. Now, sir, since the Russians have backed out from the JCPOA deal, in a way, what exactly is happening, sir? Where will it lead? We all thought that perhaps sanctions would be released and Iran would be able to, in fact, bring the economy to that level where they should have, because the kind of assets, the kind of resources they have, they are so underutilized.
Well, all these events seem to be exclusive and individual, but there is a system, and they all appear to be also interconnected. And we have seen that when President Biden called UAE and Saudi Arabia, they didn't take the call. And we've seen that there have been several abstentions, not only in the Security Council but also in the General Assembly, on the issue of criticizing the Russian attack on Ukraine. And at the same time, we see that the JCPOA, as you just mentioned, has halted, whereas it's all documentation was ready and complete as far as writing the new agreement was concerned. And the Russians have halted the process, and it probably will stay halted for a while till, of course, the Russians feel satisfied with the commitment from the US as regard to their sanctions that the Americans have put on the Russians after this attack on Ukraine. And we've seen this, as you mentioned, the talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia have halted suddenly, and we also know that there have been mass executions in Saudi Arabia on last Saturday.
81.
And out of those, 50 plus were from the Shia sect. So that could be one reason for Iran to halt the negotiations, which were going on quite promisingly, and it was expected that something very productive and useful would come out of the negotiations. But unfortunately, they have halted. And then we have seen that Iran has, of course, launched these 12 ballistic missiles at Erbil, and at a place which
this was the Kurd capital.
According to the Iranians, it was a center for conspiracy and mischief by these Israelis, whereas the local authorities of Kurdish zone have denied this, and they say that there is no Israeli presence over there. But Iranians have been claiming this for the last several weeks, that such an activity is taking place from there. And we've also seen that the Israelis have continued their attacks in Syria, and while they've had hundreds of attacks since 2011 when the civil war began in Syria, but since January this year there have been I think 11 attacks in Syria, and this was the most recent one, of course, as a result of which we've seen that two of the members of Iranian Al-Quds force were killed, and Iran has specifically mentioned this, that this is in retaliation to that killing of the Al-Quds force officers, and Israelis have not commented on it. But it's unfortunate that both Iraq and Syria continue to be a ground where a proxy warfare is going on between Iran and Israel, and we also seen that there's been a presence of USA, Russia, and even Turkey, and the situation remains uncertain, and it will remain so till, of course, there is an agreement between, of course, the two superpowers, because Russia, of course, is now reclaiming its status. So between Russia and America, and till then we will continue to witness this. And unfortunately, when we see this cross-border proxy war, then it encourages and incites other countries in the world that probably this is a fair game. And if we recall the activity of 2019 February in Pakistan, the Balakot strike, the Indians also thought that they could have get away with it, because if Iran can get away with it in Syria and Iraq, if Israel can get away with it, of course, in the same reason, why can't the Indians get away with it? Hence, they went ahead and tried it. Well, of course, the responsibility lies, of course, not only on the UN, but of course the two big powers, that not only that they must resolve their differences, they must stop their interference in the region, because otherwise this will continue, and the weaker countries like Syria and Iraq will continue to suffer. And luckily this time, as a result of the 12 ballistic missile attacks, there were only 2 injuries. But there could have been many more casualties.
Yeah, absolutely, sir.
And a lot has happened in Syria, and many people have been killed as a result.
But this is also giving Iran a lot of confidence that, you know, if they want to hit, they can hit. They have the capability now.
Certainly.
Perhaps a few meters here and there, but still.
And we also seen that there have been very little, very lukewarm, reaction from the Americans.
The interesting part, let me read it out for you. US condemns attack as outrageous violation of Iraq's sovereignty. Look who's talking. Iraq's sovereignty you're talking about? Come on. I mean, this is a joke and a half, honestly speaking. Now, coming to you, Ambassador Saab, Ambassador Asif Durrani Saab. How do you see this situation, sir? And perhaps I think it is going to be a win-win situation for the Israelis if these JCPOA talks are stalled or they do not yield any result, because it seems that they were very close as far as drafting a proper document is concerned. Though the Russians, I mean, they backed out, and perhaps the Russians backed out was on the concern that if sanctions are lifted on Iran for that matter, then most of this oil or gas or energy resources could be utilized by the Europeans or otherwise, and that could be a problem for the Russian authorities. Ambassador Saab?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, there was some interruption in the communication. If I've understood, your question was regarding JCPOA, yes? Yes. Let me tell you that there's going to be a lot of haggling as far as JCPOA is concerned. Well, there was a news last week that they have almost agreed and they are about to sign it, and then Iran would be back. And there was also news soon after Russian invasion of Ukraine that Iranian oil would be in the market soon because the sanctions would be lifted, and there has been an agreement. But at the same time, it's also a fact that Russia raised the question that since it's a party in the JCPOA and any dealing with Iran, since the sanctions would be lifted, and the United States has imposed sanctions on Russia as well. So what would be the nature of those sanctions? So this is a question to which both politically and legally the United States will have to look into, because it's not going to happen like this, that once everything has been done and then at the last moment then they'll raise the question, yes, since Russians are under sanctions, so Iran cannot do the deal, or since Russians are under sanctions, they cannot deal with other countries. So there are a plethora of questions which, because of this Russian observation, that has given birth to a plethora of questions. So I think it will take a while. But with regard to the attacks on Erbil, Iran has fired 12 ballistic missiles. I think those were the warning shots, because if you see, there was hardly a casualty except for a couple of injuries. It was a warning shot because the Americans are building their consulate in Erbil. And Erbil is the capital of Kurdistan province in Iraq. And it has been a bastion of dissidents and freedom movement for many decades, even during Saddam Hussein's time. So, and the Kurds have maintained their autonomy within Iraq under the American supervision. Now, Americans have withdrawn, and still the Kurds, they are maintaining their autonomy in the region. I don't know what will happen once all American troops are withdrawn, because right now Iran is also not feeling comfortable with the Iraqi Kurdistan because they fear that the autonomous region of Iraqi Kurdistan in fact may have influence on Iranian Kurdistan. So there are undercurrents which Iranians are quite concerned, and so it was also a warning shot to the Kurdish leadership in Iraq that if they give too much leeway to the Americans, or for that matter, say Israelis. I'm not sure about Israel, because Kurds have not so far announced their recognition of Israel, and they cannot do it because this is not within the purview of Iraqi Kurdistan's province. because foreign affairs is with the center and it is with Baghdad. But that is a warning shot. Instead of telling the Americans that you are in fact entrenching yourself, I think it was on the pretext that the Israelis are there, so they have fired this. So this is a way, and there could have been some other incidents which may have taken place either in Iraq or in Syria, to which Iran may have responded to. Yes.
All right. Now coming to you, Mr. Farukh Amil Saab. Now, a couple of points here, because Iran has always favored the proxies initiated by them, whether it's Palestine or Lebanon or Syria or Iraq or Kurdistan, that area I'm talking about. Perhaps this could be the beginning of another turmoil in the area, sir, because the presence of Israelis is there, whether we admit it or we don't, but the reality is that American influence has always been there, is still there. But sir, looking at the current misunderstanding, let me be very careful regarding the choice of words, between the Americans and the Saudis, and between the Americans and the United Arab Emirates. Do you think, sir, is Iran trying to take advantage of that?
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show again. I think the first two speakers have basically covered a lot of the points already. But to answer your specific question, you've got to look at what has been happening to Iraq since the American invasion took place. As you know, as we all know, that Iraq was in turmoil straight after the U.S. invasion, and there were forces that were trying to break up Iraq. Pakistan was very clear about this, that we supported the territorial integrity of the country. But this did not stop the Kurdish the yearning for an independent state. One of the earliest supporters and continuous supporters has been Israel, and Israeli elements that have seen a resource-rich area. Erbil, it's an oil-producing region. It would give contact. As Durrani said, and this was my own reading, this is a kind of a warning shot for many reasons, and the warning shot to the administration in Erbil. Now, if you look at what the Iraqi Prime Minister said, what the Iraqi Foreign Office has done, and what the Prime Minister of Barzani of the Kurdish autonomous region, what he said, they've obviously been very disturbed by this. And of course, they had a cabinet meeting in Baghdad, and they called the Iranian ambassador in to give him a démarche. And they said, well, we refuse to allow Iraq to be used as a venue to settle scores. In other words, proxy wars. Now, the main point here is that Iraq is obviously it's a nation state. It's a friendly country. We have Pakistan has good relations with it, but it's a very complicated situation vis-a-vis Iran and vis-a-vis the Kurdish question in general. The other aspect that I would sort of differ with is the linkage of the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, with this particular event. I think that the Russian, let's say, the pause or it's linked to their own sanctions and to their own situation vis-a-vis Ukraine, and I think it's reading a little too much into this missile strike. This is definitely the tit-for-tat thing that has been going on when Qasem Soleimani was murdered in January 2020, and of course, the most shocking thing was the right just outside Tehran when Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was assassinated. He was a top nuclear scientist, and you've also got to remember that Iran has lost between I think in the last several years, 4 of its nuclear scientists in mysterious assassinations. So obviously, Iran has a vested interest, and they absolutely cannot have a situation whereby a part of Iraq is being used for covert activities against it, because you see, Israel's been doing this, and it's a known fact. Now, the other thing I did want to mention is that yes, the Americans gave a muted response, but but the response nonetheless. They called it an outrageous violation in net price. The State Department spokesperson was clear. He said, well, it didn't harm us. No U.S. facility was damaged or personnel was injured. And interesting enough is the words were no indication that the attack was directed at the U.S. So now who was this missile meant for? So this is one question that we need to sort of bear in mind. And the other thing is that the linkage between what is going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran and those baby steps to normalize relations. But of course, how can that missile be connected to the largest mass execution? And in the eyes of obviously Iran, the majority was Shia. So if you could overconnect the dots and say, well, all of this is super linked. But that track with the Saudis is slightly different. And this one with the JCPOA, with the Russians, is their own problem vis-a-vis Ukraine. This, to me, is a very clear warning sign for the administration in Erbil. Don't mess with this. Don't let that Israeli center come up. Now, I have not seen any reports from where Israel has commented on this. Although there was one thing that I did read in the Haaretz, and it was quoting one of the Hezbollah news agencies, and they were saying, well, look, that 4 Israeli officers were killed and 7 were wounded. Now that's whether Hezbollah and one of the news agencies would claim that is unknown. But Israel, they will respond in their own way. If they've suffered damages or if they've suffered losses, they will never come out and say, well, we took this hit, because this is that tit-for-tat game that is going on.
All right. Now, Irim sir, I was just thinking that since the entire global focus is on Ukraine now, you switch on any television channel, especially the Western ones, so 24/7 coverage of Ukrainian issue, anti-Russia campaign. I mean, let me put it this way. Do you think, sir, while the world is focusing on that side, something can happen over here as well? And perhaps Israel can retaliate? Or maybe since we are talking about Iraq as a place or as a country being used for proxies, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine for that matter, sir? Do you think a new chapter will start here, sir?
Well, I think right now there is no such development which may warrant such an outcome in the Middle East. And whatever differences or fears that Iran and Israel have from each other, they are settling it within the Syria and Iraq through their proxies. And we know that the Iranians have their groups in Syria, they are in Iraq, and Israelis have already indicated to them that their presence on the Israeli border would be a red line. So they continue to undertake either air attacks or missile attacks on their declared targets. And similarly, the elements or groups in support of Iran that exist in Iraq and in Syria continue to act against Israeli interests within these two countries. And this is a rare occasion where we have seen that Iran has directly intervened or directly attacked in Iraq, and of course owned it up also that it was launched by them. The last being the retaliation against the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. So I think while the world is engrossed and preoccupied with the Russian and Syrian conflict, I don't think that this gives an opportunity to Israel or to Iran to heighten up or gain some ground within Middle East, especially in these two countries. And I think they will continue to engage each other through their proxies in the manner that has been happening for the last several years in the Middle East.
Now, what we have witnessed, sir, whether you talk about that accidental bombing the port in Lebanon, Beirut, that was unbelievable. And the Israeli intelligence reports said that they were collecting a certain sort of urea that was in fact maybe could have been used to develop bombs or something of that sort. So eliminated. No matter how many people got killed, nobody cares. Over 250, sir, and the damage was unbelievable. We all witnessed that. Now, in this particular case, so when you have proxies of that level, that a third party or a third country is being targeted by two countries who are having their proxy. Pakistan has been the center of Saudi and Iranian proxies, sir. We never heard about the killing of Shias or Sunnis, on the basis of sect in the early 80s or late 70s or even prior to that. But after that, sir, yes, whenever there is a procession, the Shias are out on the 9th and 10th of Muharram. So look at the kind of security that was never there before. Obviously, sir, a certain sector is targeted, whether you talk about Hazaras in Balochistan and so on and so forth. All the adversaries of Pakistan would do that. Iraq became another center, Syria, Lebanon, sir, even Yemen for that matter. Recent violence or whatever is happening out there, extreme bombing, people are dying, children are hungry over there, nobody talks about it. I think this situation in Yemen is worse than that, 20 times worse than that of Ukraine, but nobody talks about it. Look at the situation in Kashmir, nobody talks about that. So there is a particular mindset of the Western world. They know where to focus and how to muster the global support. Over here, sir, it seems that this could lead to a major problem, because the entire situation, not only in the Middle East, but even in the West, in the European Union, sir, it's very, very fluid.
Well, while we've seen that the European Union has reacted to or responded to the Ukrainian crisis in a manner which is at time which appears racist, because we've seen that there have been incidents at the Polish border where they have refused and turned away people of color, and only they said that we'll be allowing only fair-skinned and blue-eyed people.
So white European Christians are allowed.
Yes. So that is a new dimension, a new aspect that has been revealed about the European mindset, and unfortunately there have not been any criticism or mention of this in the European media, and we've seen only through social media that such incidents have taken place, and this is a new dimension that has come out.
Indian students were offloaded from a train.
Yes. So that is something new that has come out from this crisis. And while the Russians have amply explained to the US and to the European Union that there were commitments and which were overlooked and which were forgotten, and hence despite reminders, the Russians had to eventually militarily intervene. And somehow the countries who were erstwhile part of Soviet Union, they seem to have overlooked this aspect, that how could they choose to switch sides, and once being member of Warsaw Pact, now they chosen to be member of NATO, and that they could get away with it, especially living next door to Russia with such a long past, and more so when there were commitments from the US that NATO would not be expanded. And we have now witnessed that the Russians...
So Ukraine is also a part of that Cold War or that proxy between the Russians and the Americans.
Yes.
I mean, they're suffering because it is always what we have noticed it during proxies, a third country is going to suffer. I mean, the real aggressors won't be fighting on their own soil, unfortunately. But this is the way it is, yes. I guess, sir. This is the modern warfare, I guess. Now, coming to you, sir, another important factor. We all thought that situation, this question is for you, Asif Durrani sahab, that the situation or the overall, effect that was being developed because of the Saudi and Iranian tussle, sir, everybody was suffering. I mean, just imagine Pakistan was told not to attend the Malaysia moot, where we were supposed to, talk about Islamophobia and so many other factors. Iranian president did attend, by the way. So Imran Khan did not go. Obviously, there were reasons. What I'm saying is, sir, that do you believe that this issue will fade away with time? Because currently the president of United States of America is not Donald Trump, who was very close and a buddy of the Saudi crown prince. This is Mr. Joe Biden. And when he called, the phone was not attended. This is not something which is normal as far as Saudi leadership is concerned. And UAE, we all know, since the Saudis have such influence over UAE, they cannot deviate from the foreign policy of the Saudis towards the West. So they did the same. What is that supposed to mean, sir? Because that is also linked with the region in one way or the other.
Yes, Faisal. On one hand, you have Iran, and after the revolution in Iran, the first victimhood displayed was from the GCC countries. Victimhood, I have used the word deliberately because since a monarchy was toppled in Iran, so all the Gulf monarchies, they felt threatened. And it was not only threatened because the Iranian clergy, they had in fact threatened the monarchy that now the next would be their turn. So from the day one, there has been a bad blood between Iran and the Gulf monarchies, led by the Saudis. Now, Saudis, since they are the largest country in the GCC countries, so they are the leaders and they have set the tone. And unfortunately, Iran-Saudi rivalry, call it religious rivalry or what, was also played out in Pakistan as well, which is why we never had this sectarian problem, but after the Saudi-Iranian tussle, we also had, and then at times we had very, bad patches of sectarian clashes. But thank God, sanity has prevailed and those elements have been controlled by and large. So it is a crisis, and because of Saudi-Iranian tussle, when I say Saudi-Iranian, so you also include GCC countries, barring Qatar or Oman, which displays neutrality. So they think that Iran has been interfering in their affairs, especially where there is a substantial Shia minority or Shias are in majority, like in Bahrain. So this has created a tension, and which is why that whole of the Middle East is under tension. Iran has also created a Shia crescent, beginning from Iraq to Syria to Lebanon. And then they have also included Palestine and Hamas into that. And there then Israelis come into the play, and they say that Iran has encircled us through this Shia crescent. So it is a game which is being played by both sides. Saudis also, they took the opportunity in Syria, and they wanted to, in fact, trounce Bashar al-Assad. But somehow Bashar al-Assad, with the help of the Iranians and subsequently from the Russians, their air support, he could retrieve the situation. But at the same time, the country has been destroyed. Millions of Syrians have become homeless, and there have been gory scenes of those children who were found dead along the seashores. So there's a death and destruction, and the United States definitely is part of it. So the whole region is in turmoil, which is again, is not good for the adjacent regions, including Pakistan. We have been directly impacted because of the competition between Saudis and Iran, and I think we have to tread very carefully. Whenever these tensions flare up, we don't have to take sides, and we haven't taken sides. We have maintained a positive neutrality, whereby we, with Saudis and Emiratis and others, we have assured their security, but at the same time, with Iran, we have assured them that our alliances with Saudi Arabia and Emirat are not intended against Iran. So this positive neutrality is so far working. But those are challenging, and we have to tread very carefully. Yes.
But one quick comment, Ambassador Saab, and that is regarding the retaliation of the Saudis, because I remember when they had, in fact, shown the flag of Pakistan on one of the as an ally on this war on Yemen. Pakistani Foreign Office retaliated, and they said nothing has been discussed, and they just did it because they're not in a mood, or they were not in a mood to hear a no. Now the point is, sir, that that was perhaps not, we were neutral, but we were not taken as neutral. We were taken as somebody who was siding with Iran and with Yemen, and this was the perception in UAE and Saudi Arabia, because interestingly I was in UAE at that time, and I got to meet a few people, and they were like literally almost ready to fight with me, that you guys betrayed us. This was the word, and I said, hold on. Then I gave them my peace of mind. But what I'm saying is that's how it was interpreted in Saudi Arabia and UAE.
The time you are telling me is Faisal, I was ambassador in UAE, and I also faced the wrath. But the question was that we can assure security, we can give security assurances within the borders of Saudi Arabia and UAE. We cannot go at Saudi's behest to Yemen, a third country, with which we have no problem. So I think it is not because of Iran, but it was our principal stand which Pakistan had to take vis-a-vis Yemen, that we could not go there. And more importantly, Pakistan is a nuclear weapon state. How can a nuclear weapon state, while we ourselves are the sponsors of negative security assurances resolution, which states that the nuclear weapon states would assure the non-nuclear weapon states that they will not be attacked, how could Pakistan go there? So I think there were also many legalistic and political issues involved in that. Yemen was the only parliament in the world which openly congratulated Pakistan on its nuclear explosions. The rest of the world, including the Muslim Ummah, they condemned Pakistan, although privately they congratulated Pakistan. So there were many other factors. And then more than that, it was Pakistan which in fact assured the security of the Saudis as well as the Emiratis, not only on this issue, on Yemen issue, but before that when Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait, we had our troops there since then, and our presence is still there. So those are different issues. And of course, Iran's involvement was there, but at the same time, Iran was not directly involved. Iran was playing proxy. So the Saudis, in fact, they now admit that they had neglected developments in Yemen. They had neglected Yemen and Hadi. So that's how the things came to that pass, and Iranians were working, and Saudis could not preempt the situation in Yemen. So they also will have to take their part of the blame. Yes.
All right. Now, last quick comment from you, Farukh Amil Saab. There was this, in fact, an interview given to an Israeli newspaper, and the former Vice President Mike Pence was being interviewed. And you know what he said? That whenever the Republican Party is going to be in power, no matter what sort of a decision is taken regarding JCPOA, even in the favor of Iran, we will not accept it. And he said that we will again withdraw from any revived deal that is of no use. How do you see that kind of a statement, sir, from the former Vice President of USA?
Well, of course, I mean, that is the constant worry for Iran, that a future Republican administration, which is molded in the image of former President Trump, or maybe President Trump again, who knows? But that's the constant Iranian worry. And that is also a worry not just for Iran, but for the other partners. Now, in the meantime, as we mentioned earlier on, the Russians have put a pause button on it because of their own issue of sanctions. So it doesn't look like a great situation for that agreement to come together and be finalized. But the issue is the Iranians have to live with that, or choose to live with that possibility that it would be reneged on again. And if it is, then I think that would be perhaps the end of any effort on the part of the Iranians to remove the sanctions and go for a nuclear agreement. But Faisal, I just wanted to add a couple of things about the original issue on this, and this was about that missile attack into Iraq. The two lessons, the two takeaways that I see from this are the, first thing is don't become a failed or a failing state with internal divisions. Lesson number one. Lesson number two, have an effective missile shield to deflect that. And if anything, and if you see what's happened recently with the mistaken, the so-called mistaken Indian ballistic missile. So this is a lesson. Maybe Iran has done this because all eyes are all on Ukraine, and in the meantime they can be settling scores with the Israelis. But the other point I wanted to mention in response to what was said earlier on, the racism reported at the Polish border. Yes, of course, that is these kind of reports are coming through. But equally, I mean, Pakistan has the largest number of refugees for the longest period since the Second World War. But Germany took 1 million people. They're Europeans too. And the thing that we don't often we overlook, whilst EU comes across as one bloc, Western Europe is not Eastern Europe. They have completely two distinct identities and histories, and that is played out at the societal level. So you won't find Warsaw ever being like Madrid or Bucharest being like Brussels. And we need to think about the elements of racism within the own Ummah. I mean, how many people, which countries, I can name 3 that took the Bosnian refugees in the 90s. The former Prime Minister took, obviously, Pakistan took them, Jordan and Malaysia. Everybody else said no. So when we start accusing others of racism, we need to look amongst the Ummah, what the Ummah has been doing. We, as Pakistan, have a fantastic and an honorable record of taking everybody from the Poles, of all people, in 1948, to the Afghans, to Somalis, to everybody. Pakistan's been taking and opening its doors and hearts and limited resources. So I just wanted to sort of mention this. And the last thing I wanted to say was we need to ask ourselves, who does not want Iranian-Saudi rapprochement? Who? Which countries, whose interest is it? And I think those answers are pretty obvious to the analysts, that if Iran and Saudi Arabia were to ever have normal relations, friendly relations, who will suffer in that? Who will suffer, not just within the region, but externally? As we know, Syria is a mess. Iraq is pulling itself together. Turkey is having to contend with a million problems on its southern borders. Lebanon has gone into complete, total economic collapse. You just have Jordan sitting there. And then, of course, we've all talked about Yemen already. So this is a very, very dangerous situation for everyone. And we have the OIC meeting, the CFM coming up. And this is a place where I think it's important that show of unity and Pakistan's bridge building. Pakistan is, took a neutral stance during the Iran-Iraq war, and it took a middle position, a mediatory position.
All right.
And I think that. So.
All right. Thank you so much, Farukh Amil Saab, for your comments, and Basit Saab, thank you so much for your time, sir. AVM Saab, thank you so much for your presence as well, sir. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you inshallah tomorrow at 8:05 p.m. Till then, you take care. Khuda Hafiz.